You're good at running things, Clara, but James is a man. He's meant to lead. That's what my father said. Not behind closed doors, not in a one-on-one conversation meant to spare my dignity. No. He said it on stage, into a mic, with a proud smile stretching across his face. He said it at the black tie retirement gala I had organized, down to the very linen napkins, the one I paid for. 300 guests were in the room, investors, board members, former mentors, even my high school economics teacher who once told me I had a business mind sharper than most men twice my age. And now here I was, standing frozen near the entrance, wearing the same navy sheath dress I'd worn when I closed our biggest contract to date, watching my father dismiss 15 years of sacrifice with a single sentence. The applause rolled in like thunder. My brother, James, who was 2 years younger than me and 15 years less experienced, gave a sheepish, "Oh, stop it" kind of wave to the crowd as our father draped a ceremonial CEO pin onto the lapel of his tux. There was no pin for me, no invitation to join them on stage, no mention of the fact that I had been acting CEO for the past 8 years. Instead, I watched from the crowd, arms by my sides, fingers still slightly sticky from a champagne spill earlier. My throat was dry, not from wine, but from something heavier. I could feel the eyes on me, some sympathetic, most confused, a few smug, and then my father kept talking. That's what made it worse. He didn't stop at the insult. He doubled down, like he believed it was wisdom. "I know what some of you are thinking," he said, chuckling. My daughter kept the books balanced. She was good at details, but this company was never meant to be managed. It was meant to be led. And that takes a man. He raised his glass to James, and they all raised theirs. I couldn't. James caught my eye from the stage for a split second. I hoped he might say something, acknowledge me, share credit, deflect the praise. But he didn't. He just smiled. The kind of smile a man wears when the crown is handed to him. Not earned. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned away from the stage, walked across the ballroom toward the garden exit. Each step felt like stepping deeper into something I hadn't yet named. Not rage, not betrayal, not grief. It was clarity. That uncomfortable, raw clarity that creeps in when you finally understand they never planned to reward you. Not because you didn't do enough, but because, in their eyes, you were never supposed to have been there to begin with. Outside. The night was cool. A breeze tugged at the hem of my dress. I could still hear the echo of my father's voice through the glass. He's meant to lead, not me, never me, and for the first time in 15 years, I realized maybe I'd built something remarkable, but I'd built it for people who would never see me as worthy of it. My father never hid the fact that he wanted a son to take over the business. I was 12 the first time I heard him say it out loud. James had just won a local spelling bee, his very first win at anything, and my father had turned to a colleague over drinks and said, "That boy's going to be the one." I always knew it. Clara's sharp, but she's not who I built this for. I had just won my second regional math tournament. No one mentioned it back then. I brushed it off. I was used to being the one in the background. I liked solving problems more than being praised for solving them, but even then, it stung. By the time I graduated from Wharton, James had dropped out of college for the second time. My mother had passed away the year before, and Dad was spiraling, not emotionally, but professionally. He took risky loans, partnered with the wrong people, and worst of all, he refused to adapt. His company, our company, was hemorrhaging money, and still he'd look me straight in the face and say things like, "Don't worry, James will come into his own. He's just finding his footing." As if I hadn't been standing steady for years. When the bank threatened foreclosure, it was me who stepped in. I was 29. I left my own startup mid-launch, liquidated my personal assets, and moved back into the house I grew up in. The one with the squeaky staircase and kitchen windows that always fogged up too fast in winter. He never asked me to. I just did it. For 6 months, I worked 18-hour days. I rebuilt the client pipeline, renegotiated supplier contracts, and cut unnecessary expenditures. I gave up nights, weekends, and most of my 20s. James. He was trying to launch a tequila brand with college friends in Tulum. He posted beach selfies while I was writing emergency payroll plans at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. Still, whenever people called the office, my father would make sure to say, "Clara's just helping out temporarily. The company's still mine, even then." I didn't mind. I thought maybe once we survive this, maybe once he sees I'm not just helping, but saving him, he'll finally let go of that old idea that only men are meant to lead. That moment never came, even after the profits returned, even after we hit our first 10-monitor quarter. Then, 20 monitors. Even when investors asked to meet with me instead of him, he still referred to me in interviews as my daughter who keeps the trains running. Never visionary. Never leader. Always dutiful. Always his girl. There was a day I'll never forget, the week we hit 35 kilometers. I brought him a portfolio I had built with the executive team. It outlined our expansion plans, projections, capital needs, everything. I thought he'd be proud. He didn't even look through the first 3 pages. He closed it and said, "You've done more than I ever expected from a daughter, Clara. But don't overreach. This is a family business, not a vanity project." And yet every year, when tax season came, it was my name that appeared on the intellectual property filings because during the restructuring, he asked me to legally shield certain company assets under my personal LLC. In case we lost everything, I still had the documents. He didn't seem to remember, but I did. I remembered everything. I remembered driving him to the hospital when he had his first heart scare. I remembered staying overnight in the ICU lobby, finishing payroll on my laptop while nurses whispered around me. I remembered calling James 4 times and getting no answer. And I remembered the voicemail he left me after the gala date was set. "Clara, don't make it all about you that night. It's about legacy, not ego. Legacy. Legacy that looked like ignoring my sacrifices. Legacy that sounded like he's meant to lead, even now." I don't know if it was more painful that my father never saw me, or that he did see me, and still chose to pretend I was invisible. But I know this: I didn't do all this for applause. I did it because I believed in what I built, because I believed someone had to hold the line. And now, after everything, I was finally starting to believe something else. That maybe holding the line for others had cost me the life I was supposed to lead. The Monday after the gala, I showed up to the office at 8:03 a.m. My nameplate had been removed from my door. The desk I had sat at for nearly a decade cleared. My monitor was gone. My bookshelves emptied except for one crumpled post-it note moved to storage. Not a word. No memo. No goodbye. I walked to the front desk, holding my breath. Melanie, the receptionist who used to bring me chamomile tea during quarterly close weeks, didn't meet my eyes. She just said, quietly, "They told me you'd be working remote." I asked. She hesitated, then nodded toward the glass-walled boardroom. Inside was James, feet up on the table, laughing with 2 junior VPs he'd poached from his failed crypto company. I didn't go in. I didn't even knock. Instead, I walked outside to the parking lot and sat in my car for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel as if it might give me some kind of direction. But all I saw in the rearview mirror was a woman who'd been shown she was replaceable a few days later. The internal memo went out. My title was changed from executive director to strategic advisor, an unpaid, undefined position. I wasn't consulted. My email access was limited to view only. When I called my father to ask why, he said, "I thought you'd be relieved. This way, you can finally rest. You've always pushed yourself too hard." I don't remember what I replied. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I just let silence be my answer. But inside, something began to shift. The ground beneath the years I'd sacrificed started to crack. That week, the press release went out James Holloway named new CEO of Holloway and Partners following historic $50 million milestone. Visionary leadership continues with the next generation. Not a single mention of me. I read it twice, 3 times. I checked the quotes, the bullet points. There it was, James taking credit for the last 8 years of growth, citing forward-thinking strategy, aggressive innovation, team restructuring, all of it lifted directly from the plans I had written. Verbatim. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Then, I opened the spreadsheet. On my desktop, the one titled H Legacy. It was private. Only I had access. I had kept it updated year after year, during my darkest hours, like a breadcrumb trail, back to the truth. It contained records of every patent filed under my name, every emergency loan I personally guaranteed, every late-night strategy plan with my electronic signature, screenshots of email chains, copies of contracts, including one with a clause written at my insistence, in the event of executive incapacitation. Ownership of the company's digital infrastructure, including proprietary data, will fall to Clara Holloway as temporary custodian. My father had signed it during his first hospitalization. He was too weak to argue at the time. He never rescinded it. I had kept that clause buried for years, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. But loyalty, I was learning, was a currency I alone seemed to be spending. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. Then came the final straw. That Friday. I received a certified letter. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once explained EBITDA to my teenage brother over cereal. Inside was a document, signed by my father and James. They had sold the company's original headquarters, the building my mother helped paint when they opened their first branch, the one I lived in for a month during the first restructure, the one that still had my fingerprints under the conference table left behind when I fell asleep reviewing cash flow reports during the 2020 panic. Sold, without my consent, without even telling me. The letter closed with a single sentence. Please return any company property still in your possession by the end of the week. That was it. No call. No thank you. Not even a line about best wishes. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that, long enough for the sun to start dipping behind the fence, long enough for the silence to become deafening. Then I stood up, went to the filing cabinet in the guest room, and pulled out a fireproof envelope I hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside were the original signed contracts, legal documents, and the USB drive I'd copied everything to just in case. Not because I ever expected to use it, but because some part of me had always known this day might come. They were still laughing when I walked back into the ballroom. The clink of champagne flutes, the droning voice of a VP reading James's 5-year vision. The string quartet in the back corner had shifted to something triumphant, almost cinematic, and yet the air felt so thick, so swollen with ignorance. I could barely breathe through it. I didn't wait for a pause in the speeches. I didn't ask permission. I walked straight toward the stage, the USB drive burning in my hand like a match. James noticed me first. His smile flickered, but didn't fade. He leaned toward the mic. Clara. Hey, come up and say a few words. This was your party after all, wasn't it? I didn't look at him. Instead, I turned to the AV technician beside the stage and said, calmly, please, switch the screen. Input. He hesitated, glanced toward my father, but I didn't waver. Now. Maybe it was the authority in my voice. Maybe it was instinct. But he did as I asked. The room dimmed slightly as the large screen behind the stage flickered. And then, desktop folders appeared, my folders. I inserted the USB and opened the first document. No music, no drama, just plain black and white scanned contracts. Timed, signed, stamped. This, I said into the mic. My voice low but clear, is the legal agreement signed 5 years ago by the then CEO of Holloway and Partners, my father. A few heads turned, some arms crossed. My father shifted in his chair, It was drafted during a health crisis when he asked me to temporarily take control of the company's most sensitive assets: the patents, the intellectual property, the core infrastructure. I clicked. The next slide showed screenshots of email threads his assistant, legal team, and my own digital signature beside his. This contract granted me not just temporary custodianship, but ownership, and it was never revoked. James stood up behind me. Okay, Clara, this isn't the time I kept speaking. It includes a clause that any successor who acts in bad faith or compromises the ethical integrity of the company voids their claim to leadership, effective immediately. Gasps now, audible, real. I turned, slowly to face them. Ladies and gentlemen, in the past 3 months, your so-called new CEO has falsified growth metrics, ghost-signed compliance forms, and diverted over $750,000 in operating funds into private shell accounts. The third slide opened bank records, a spreadsheet, withdrawals timed within hours of each investor milestone, one line even marked with a note clean before Clara sees. That was James's handwriting. I had it matched. The crowd shifted, murmurs built. My father tried to rise, but someone, a partner from our European firm, held a hand to his chest. You need to let her finish. I turned to him at last. You didn't see me because you chose not to, but your name is on every page of these contracts. You handed me this power when you thought I was loyal enough never to use it. I paused. You were right about one thing. I was loyal. Then I pulled out the final document. Thick, sealed, notarized. But this morning, I filed for formal transfer of all core IP holdings to a new independent entity, one I control. All of your systems, your platforms, your product backbone are no longer legally usable by Holloway and Partners. James's face had gone chalk white. My father, still frozen, hands limp at his sides. I leaned into the mic one last time. You didn't just underestimate me, you assumed I would stay silent. You forgot I built this company with more than loyalty. I built it with truth. And I'm taking it with me. For a moment. No one moved. It wasn't shock anymore. It was something heavier. Something that settled over the crowd like a slow, suffocating wave of realization. The man they had clapped for just minutes ago, James, was now standing beside a sister he had betrayed, in front of a father who could no longer look up. Someone in the back, a former supplier, I think was the first to clap, not loudly, just once, then another. Then someone else stood, and within seconds. The applause swept the room not like celebration, but like justice cracking through the walls. James stepped forward, voice thin and shaking. This is slander. My team know, I said, turning to face him fully. This is your mirror, James. You just don't like what's looking back. He looked to our father for help, but Dad wasn't standing anymore. He had sunk into his chair, his head in his hands. I didn't feel triumphant seeing him like that. I felt done asking, done proving, done waiting. I left the stage without another word as I passed through the ballroom doors. I heard my name called, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need their questions or their applause. I had said what I came to say. The truth was planted now, and it would grow with or without me, out in the hallway. The air felt cooler, lighter. I leaned against the wall and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Not because I had won, not because I had the upper hand, but because, for the first time, I had chosen myself. Moments later, one of the junior developers, Allison, walked up, cautiously. She couldn't have been more than 26, and her eyes were wide with something that looked like awe, but also fear. Are you really pulling everything she asked? I nodded once. Only what's mine. She hesitated. Does that mean you're starting something new? I looked down at the USB still clutched in my hand. It felt warm now, like a spark waiting to be lit. Maybe. I said, or maybe I'm just starting over. And right then, I knew I wasn't going back in that room. I wasn't going to fight them for the scraps, because what I had wasn't a piece of a broken legacy. It was a blueprint for something better. They tried to clean up the mess quietly, 3 days after the gala. The board released a vague public statement, leadership transition under review. No names, no context, just hollow words, the kind you issue when the walls are cracking and you hope no one hears it fall. But people did hear loudly within a week. 3 major clients terminated their contracts, not because they were angry, because they felt deceived, betrayed, and investors don't invest in rot. Then came the lawsuits. One from a former compliance officer who had been forced out 6 months earlier. She had flagged the very same financial irregularities I'd exposed on that USB. Another from a vendor James had promised fast-track payments to, in exchange for personal favors, emails, proof, screenshots. The damage unraveled faster than I even imagined. And still, I didn't say a word, not to the press, not on social media. I let the truth do its own walking. James resigned quietly the following Tuesday. No press conference, no goodbye email, just a notice slipped to HR, citing irreconcilable visions. But the damage was too deep. 3 directors stepped down, the company's reputation. Once pristine, now floated in headlines laced with phrases like internal corruption and ethical failure. I knew what people wanted. They wanted to see me step back in, reclaim the throne, fix what had been broken, but I didn't. Because this wasn't about revenge, not anymore. I'd spent too many years fixing things for people who didn't care I was bleeding to do it all over again for pride. Still. Justice has a funny way of arriving with silence. I received an email from one of the senior partners, a man who had sat beside my father at the gala. His subject line read, "I owe you more than an apology." He wrote about how he'd believed the story they sold him, that James was a visionary, that I was just the support system. He said he watched the screen that night in horror, not because he was surprised, but because some part of him had always known. And he ended with something that stayed with me. I thought leadership looked like command. That night, I saw it looked like courage. As for my father, he didn't call, not after the gala, not after the headlines, not after James vanished to Arizona for a digital detox. But I heard things. That he stopped showing up to the club where he used to hold court with old colleagues. That he skipped the quarterly partner brunch for the first time in 12 years. That he started sitting alone at the corner booth in the same diner we used to go to on Saturdays silent. Stiff. Untouched coffee in front of him. I didn't gloat. I didn't hate him. But I also didn't go see him. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because, for once, I had nothing left to explain. I had said everything I needed to say without screaming, without breaking, and that, I think, was the part that cut deepest. Some wounds don't leave bruises, some look like silence. A few weeks later, I received a package, no return address, just my name in his handwriting. Inside a photo. It was old. From the very first year the company launched, my mother was in it, holding a drill upside down, laughing. My father had his arm around her, beaming. And there I was, 10 years old, holding the corner of a banner that said, "We build what we believe." No note, no apology, just that, and for me. That was enough to close the door gently, instead of slamming it. The last time I saw James was in a coffee shop 2 towns over. He didn't recognize me at first. He was thinner, pale. His laptop was open, screen blank. He looked up, startled. I gave him a small nod. That was all. He didn't nod back. I walked away feeling nothing. Not pity. Not revenge, just release. Some people never say sorry. Some never realize what they lost until no one comes back to help them find it. And me, I didn't return to the company. I didn't reclaim my desk or ask for credit in the history books. I simply kept walking forward. Because the truest form of justice isn't what happens to the people who hurt you. It's what you finally allow yourself to leave behind. It's quiet now, but it's not the lonely kind of quiet. It's the kind that fills a room like sunlight through an open window, soft, patient, not asking for anything back. My mornings are slower, no alarm clocks, no 3-hour meetings or performance reports written between red-eye flights. I wake up when I wake up. I make coffee the way I like it, black, hot, no sugar. I drink it by the kitchen window, barefoot, watching the rosemary in the garden finally bloom. I moved into a small house just outside the city. Nothing big, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smells like lemon oil and hope. I planted the hydrangeas myself, even though I knew nothing about soil or spacing. They still came up wild and blue this spring. I didn't start a new company. Not right away. People asked, people offered, old clients, ex-staff, even former competitors. They said things like, "The market needs more leaders like you," or "You could build an empire." But I didn't want an empire. I wanted peace. There's a difference between building something out of passion and building it because you're still bleeding. I needed to stop the bleeding, so I rested. For the first time in decades, I rested without guilt. Some mornings I walk down to the corner bakery just because the owner remembers how I like my croissants slightly underbaked. Some afternoons I journal or call people back just to talk. Not to pitch, not to persuade, just to talk. And sometimes, when I'm alone and the house is still, I look at the framed photo on the mantle, the one from that first office, years ago, my mother's smile, my father's pride, my little girl hand, gripping that banner, "We build what we believe." Only now I finally know what I believe in. A few weeks ago, I bought a new dress. It's nothing fancy, just soft cotton, slate gray, with deep pockets and sleeves that make me feel like I could carry books or fresh herbs or absolutely nothing at all. But I chose it for me, not for an event, not to look capable, not to look like a CEO, just because it felt like freedom on fabric. And when I slipped it on that first morning, standing barefoot on the hardwood floor of my new home, I caught my reflection, and I didn't see the woman who'd been overlooked. I didn't see the one they doubted. I saw someone whole. Not because she'd won, not because others had lost, but because she had finally let go of trying to be chosen by people who were never capable of seeing her value in the first place. Sometimes, healing looks like walking away. Sometimes, justice looks like planting new things in quiet soil. And sometimes, the real legacy isn't what you build for others, it's what you reclaim for yourself. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever been the one who kept showing up while someone else got the credit, if you've ever been told you were too much, or not enough, or not the right fit for the thing you helped hold together, I see you, and I hope, someday soon, you see yourself too. Not through their eyes, through your own. Because maybe it's not about proving anyone wrong. Maybe it's about no longer needing their permission to begin again. If this story echoes in your chest, leave a comment. Tell me if you've ever been there. Or send this to someone you know who's been silent for too long. And if you need the reminder today, you don't have to fight harder to earn your worth. You already have it. You just need to stop handing it to people who'll never know what to do with it. Because maybe it's not about proving anyone wrong. Maybe it's about no longer needing their permission to begin again. And if this story, if even a single part of it felt like a whisper from your own life, leave a comment below. Tell me what you had to walk away from. Not to be dramatic, but to survive. And if you know someone who's been carrying too much for too long, someone who's always been the one holding the rope while others climb, send this to them. They might need to hear it too. And if you're new here, or you've been quietly listening for a while, tap subscribe. This space, it's for us, the ones who've done the work, paid the price, and are finally starting to come home to ourselves. You're not alone, not anymore.